Hello students, in the last class we discussed about the background of feminism as a critical theory. Then we discussed about various concepts and terminologies associated with feminism. Then we discussed about various approaches to feminism. In this lecture, we will discuss about the typology of feminism on the epistemological ground, and we will also discuss the major contribution of feminism as a theory in international relations and also look at its limitation. Now let us focus on the broad outline on the basis of which we will continue our discussion on feminism. First we will discuss about the background, then we will be discussing about two main typologies of feminism on epistemological regions. First is the empirical feminism, the second is analytical feminism. Then we will examine the contribution of gender for the understanding of global politics, particularly looking at the views on the state. So let us start with the background of the two main typologies of feminism, which is basically divided on the basis of epistemological regions. Since the late 1980s, gender perspectives to international relations have gained growing prominence, along with other critical theories, and that have in their various ways challenged the mainstream international relations theories, particularly the realist theory and the liberal theories. So we have already discussed that how the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union greatly influenced the emergence of critical theories, and how these critical theories in a way challenged the main arguments of the mainstream theories, that was realism and liberal theories. Feminism has made a particular contribution to the so-called fourth debate, which we discussed during the evolution of the discipline, and which has opened up questions about the nature of theory and politics of knowledge production. So feminism has refused to accept that knowledge is impartial, knowledge is objective, because as we discussed about Robert Koch's famous statement that theory is always made by someone for some purpose. So that is the starting point for all the critical theories, including feminism. The new perspectives have generally accepted that all theories are conditioned by the social and historical context in which the activity of theorizing takes place. So there is always a context, there is always a social and historical context in which the theories have been formulated. Realist theory, for example, was formulated in the beginning of the Cold War. So there is always a historical context and also a social context. The social context was the fight between the America and the USSR, and particularly the end of America's policy of isolationism and prominent role in the post Second World War period. So every theory has a social context, has a historical context. But what does it mean to put it a feminist lens or gender lens on global politics? But when we say the feminist perspective on international politics or global politics, so that exactly adds to our curiosity. There are two main ways which take into account of how prevailing gender relations alter analytical and theoretical approaches to global politics. So there are two main ways through which we can understand this. These are sometimes called empirical feminism and analytical feminism. So basically, as I said, after looking at different approaches, the approaches particularly talked about their perspectives, but on epistemological regions we can divide these two types of feminism, particularly for their contribution for understanding international politics in terms of theory, in terms of concepts, in terms of policy contributions, in terms of methodology. So everything we will be explaining, we will be discussing on the basis of these two typologies of feminism. It is argued that this type of categorization is beneficial not only for the development of international politics, but also for the manifestation of the contributions that the feminist thinking makes to the field of international relations. So this categorization is beneficial. That's why we have decided to particularly focus on this aspect, because that will help us to understand the development of international relations as a discipline, and also the highlight the contribution of feminism as a theory for a better understanding of international relations. Now let us focus on empirical feminism. The empirical feminism is primarily concerned to add women in the existing analytical framework. So basically, as I said earlier, it was understood that international politics is blind to gender. So it has not recognized, it has not seen the contribution of the females to international politics, of the kind of marginalizations the female were facing. So these issues were not considered important for the mainstream theories, who were particularly focusing on anarchy, on balance of power, on distribution of power, on self-help, on national security. So these issues, the gender issues, were never been considered as any importance, or it was not considered very important for international relations. This perspective has an essential empirical orientation because it addresses the underrepresentation or misrepresentation of women in a discipline that has conventionally focused only on male dominated institutions and processes. As I said, basically the objective of empirical feminism was that it wanted to address the underrepresentation of, or sometimes misrepresentation of women in a discipline that was claiming itself as an international discipline, as a global discipline. Its critique of conventional approaches to international politics is thus formulated in the question, where are the women? So basically, it was something like, they were not there, and because if you look at the theories in the concepts of international politics, it was evident that there was no discussion on them. So the question starts with this, that where are the women? Making feminist sense of international politics therefore means recognizing the previously invisible contributions that women make to shaping the world politics. So one objective of empirical feminism is to make the contribution of women in shaping the world politics evident, and that's why, for example, domestic workers of various kinds, migrant laborers, diplomats' wives, sex workers on military bases and so forth. So what particularly they wanted to highlight the contribution of women in shaping world politics. What was the contribution of domestic workers of various kinds, the migrant workers, even diplomats' wives, sex workers who were associated with military bases and so forth. So these contributions were never recognized earlier. So that was the objective of empirical feminism, to highlight their contribution. The influence of such thinking can be seen in the adoption of gender mainstreaming by the United Nations itself, as the UN declared 1976 to 85 as the UN decade for women, and other bodies such as the World Bank. So earlier the international institutions like IMF, World Bank and UNO, they were not also highlighting the issues of women. So that's why particularly during this period they were also started to recognize the contribution of women, and that can be evident when you look at the period from 1976 to 85, when the UN declared that decade as the decade for women. You might be thinking that when critical theory like feminism developed in the early 1990s, so why the UN took up the issue in 76-85? So that was because of the pressure of different kinds of waves of feminism that substantially challenged the male-centric agenda of the international organizations, and that was the reason why the United Nations from the late 1970s took up the issues of women, including the IMF and World Bank. However, although adding women demonstrates that women are and have always been relevant to international political activities and global processes, such a gender lens has its own limitations. So, it is always fine to highlight the contribution of women or adding women in the theoretical and policy discourse, but there are certain limitations which we have to also remember. First, it only recognizes gender as an empirical and not an analytical category, because it widens our awareness on the range of global processes rather than changes our understanding of them. So when you focus on gender as an empirical variable, not an analytical category, then that may help us to widen our awareness. But that doesn't help us to much understand changes that is going on in the world, and also about the issues related to the women. Second, by highlighting the underrepresentation of women in conventional leadership roles, and particularly in national and global levels, it is unduly concerned with the interest of elite women, while giving insufficient attention to how rectifying such gender imbalances might affect the behavior of global actors. So, you are particularly when you are raising the issue of women, you are in diplomacy, in foreign policy, many other affluent positions, that's fine, but you are again talking of very minority of women or very small number of women, because these are high positions. You are not talking of the general women, the issues facing by the common women, rather you are talking of the interest of elite women. So, that was the limitation of empirical feminism. Now, let us discuss about analytical feminism. Analytical feminism, by contrast, is concerned to highlight the gender biases that pervade the theoretical framework and key concept of mainstream theory, particularly realism. So, analytical feminism's main contribution can be understood in their challenging the mainstream IR theory and also the concept in international relations, and they are particularly challenging the basic assumptions of realism. It is analytical in that it addresses the issue of how the world is seen and understood, drawing on ideas of different feminist approaches. So, whatever approaches we discussed earlier, drawing on their ideas, it basically, the analytical feminism basically addresses the issue of how the world is seen and understood. In a way, it is also similar to, you can say, constructivism, but because it applies gender as a category of analysis, so it is different from constructivism. Whereas mainstream theories have traditionally been presented as gender neutral, analytical feminism uncovers the hidden assumptions that stem from the fact that such theories derived from a social and political context in which male domination is taken for granted. So, although the mainstream theories, they claim that they are gender neutral, whatever they are saying, that is something universal, that is applicable to everyone, that knowledge is very objective, this kind of arguments were challenged by the feminists and particularly the analytical feminists, those who try to uncover the hidden assumptions that stem from those theories, and particularly they drive our attention to those issues that these are all social and political context in which male domination is taken for granted. So, all whatever they are saying, this is all relevant to the male dominated kind of mentality. It is not speaking, it is not saying something about the unique issues in which the women are finding themselves. Key concept and ideas of mainstream theories therefore reflect a masculinist bias, and in pioneering this kind of analysis, Tickner, one great analytical feminist, thus reformulated Hans Morgenthau's 6 principles of political realism to show how seemingly objective laws in fact reflect the male values rather than female ones. So, she was the most vocal in her criticism of classical realism, particularly the 6 principles given by Hans J. Morgenthau. Morgenthau's account of power politics portrays states as autonomous actors intent on pursuing self-interest by acquiring power over other states, a model that reflects the traditional dominance of husband-father within the family and of male citizens within society at large. So, whatever Morgenthau said, the feminists interpret that in this way, that when you say states are autonomous actors, they are always interested for their own national interest, they want to acquire power over others. This kind of model is basically speaks something about the kind of dominance of husband and father within the family and male centric nature of the society at large. At the same time, this gendered conception of power as power over takes no account of forms of human relationship that may be more akin to female experience, such as caring, interdependence and collaborative behavior. So, when you are talking of conflict, you are talking of interest, you are talking of autonomous actor, you are not talking of something the female experience in their day to day life, such as caring, interdependence and collaborative behavior. So, that is why she criticized Morgenthau's 6 principles of realism one by one. Now, we will discuss about gender and global politics, particularly feminist perspective on state. The issues of identity in global politics are generally dominated by an emphasis on identification with the nation state. So, as we discussed, international politics starts with the nation, international relations starts with the interstate relationship. So we find that basically the international system is identified with the nation state. Feminists have attempted to demonstrate the extent to which both the state and the nation are entangled with gender assumptions and biases. Feminism doesn't contain a theory of the state as such, so they are not interested, or they have not given a separate theory of state. Furthermore, they have usually not regarded the nature of state power as a central political issue, preferring instead to concentrate on the deeper structure of male power centered on institutions such as the family. So their interest is not in the theory of a state or nature of state power, rather they are talking of the deeper structure of male power that basically pervades all the social institutions, including the family. Nevertheless, radical feminists in particular have argued that patriarchy operates in and through the state, meaning that the state is in fact a patriarchal state. So the radical feminists, they have a different take on this issue, and they think that what the state is doing is actually protecting a patriarchal state where the male values dominate, where the male birth is celebrated. So that kind of patriarchal state is actually the realists are talking about. To simplify this understanding, the state is run by the men for women. So so they have a different take on this issue. Modern radical feminists have paid particular attention to the emergence of the welfare state, seeing it as the expression of a new kind of patriarchal power. So the radical feminists, they have a different take on the welfare state. For instance, women have become increasingly dependent on the state as clients or customers of state services such as childcare institutions, nurseries, schools, social services, and also employees in the so-called caring professions such as nursing, social work, and education. If you carefully look at the welfare state, you will find that the position of women has not also been improved very much, because again everything is gender specific. You have to do this, you can do that. So that kind of division of labor is there, and the radical feminists are particularly unhappy with this kind of arrangement. The gender character of the state is not only significant in consolidating and possibly extending the internal structure of male power, but also shaping the external behavior of the state. So internally, the state is not very different from its external behavior, because internally it is composed of the internal structures of male power, and that in a way influencing the external power of the state. Here, patriarchy dictates that state will be competitive, aggressive, and prone to conflict, and were reflecting the forms of social interaction that are characteristics of male society generally. So particularly the feminists are worried that when you have a patriarchal state that is dominated by the kind of male centric family structure, that state is supposed to be competitive, aggressive, and prone to conflict, because now that is typically the characteristics of a male society. Moreover, such tendencies and behavior are legitimized by the conceptual framework through which the international system has conventionally been interpreted. So this is the state that is considered as the main actor in international politics, and if this is the state, if that disregards the values and contribution of half of the population, then you expect that what kind of role it will be playing in the international politics. State sovereignty, the central principle of the Westphalian state system, presents states as separate and independent entities, autonomous actors operating in an anarchical environment, and such an image can be seen to reflect the essentially masculinist view of the world, insofar as male upbringing stresses the cultivation of independence, self-reliance, and robustness. So if you look at the male upbringing, particularly the males, they are identified with independence, self-reliance, and robustness. And if you have a patriarchal state, that would definitely be aggressive and prone to conflict. Very much the same can be said about the stress in mainstream international theory on the national interest as the primary motivation of states. So they have also a different understanding of national interest in addition to different understanding on the state. Indeed, in this light, the classical realists believe that state egoism reflects human egoism, should in fact perhaps be recast as state egoism reflects male egoism. So, as Morgenthau said that, international law is rooted in human nature, and this human nature is basically, egoistic, and when you are talking of human nature, it doesn't include the females, rather, the realists are talking of a kind of human nature that is the human nature of the males. So, in that way, the feminists interpret that, when you are talking of state egoism, it actually, reflects male egoism. The rhetoric of nationalism is also heavily sexualized and gendered, as, for instance, the idea of patriotism as the love of one's country. So, if you look at the idea of nationalism, that is also, sexualized and gendered, and this will be evident when we discuss the fact that the role of women as mothers of the nation, reproducers of the ethnic or national group itself, as well as the transmitters of the distinctive culture, they place a special emphasis on female purity. So, if you look at the whole idea of nationalism, you will find that, women are equated as the mothers of the nation, reproducing the ethnic or national group and transmitting its distinctive culture and identity. So, particularly when we say that, the feminists consider that this is a kind of emphasis on female purity. However, such tendencies can also have wider implications, not least in linking nationalist conflict to the possibility of violence against women. So, if you consider female as, pure, female should be pure, they are the mothers of the nation, they are the transmitters of its distinctive culture. So, that again has the problem of, possibility of violence against women. The honor of men as protectors of women and the moral integrity of the nation is best destroyed through physical attacks on the honor of women through rape and other forms of sexual violence. So, when you consider women are the mother of the nation, or you consider them something, they are expected to be pure, and your conception of purity is different from the males and females. So, whenever there is a problem with any country, that kind of perception actually adds to the kind of physical attacks the women are suffering from, particularly through rape and other forms of sexual violence. We have so many examples how during a war, or when a particular nation wins after a war, how the soldiers, they have raped the defeated nation's women, and how that is being celebrated as a kind of revenge they have taken against that particular nation. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. We discussed that feminism has made a major contribution to the fourth debate in international relations, which has raised issues regarding the nature of theory and politics of knowledge production in international relations. In feminist scholarship, there are two main ways which take into account of how prevailing gender relations alter analytical and theoretical approaches to global politics. They are the empirical feminism and the analytical feminism. The empirical feminism emphasizes the collection and analysis of empirical data to understand and address gender inequalities and issues in the society. The empirical feminists examine patterns of gender discrimination in employment, disparities in access to healthcare, or the impact of gender norms on political participation. The objective is to address the underrepresentation or misrepresentation of women in the area of public policy. Analytical feminism, on the other hand, focuses on philosophical and theoretical analysis to critically examine theories, concepts, assumptions related to gender and feminism. They criticize the traditional mainstream IR theories such as the realism and liberalism for their gender blindness to uncover underlying assumptions and implications related to gender. The goal is often to develop new framework or refine the existing theories that better account for gender dynamics and contribute to broader philosophical debates about equality, identity, and ethics. We also discussed feminist perspective on the state that offer critical insights into how gender dynamics intersect with political power and governance. We focused on three key aspects. First, the state as patriarchal institution. The feminist scholars often argue that the state is historically and structurally patriarchal, that perpetuate male dominance and privilege. The laws regarding property rights, citizenship and employment that have historically favored men over the women. Second, the gender division of labor. States often allocate resources and responsibilities in ways that uphold traditional gender roles, such as assuming women's primary responsibility for caregiving and men's dominance in public and political spheres. Third is violence and security. Traditional notions of security often focus narrowly on the military threats and national defense, sidelining issues like gender-based violence, reproductive rights, and economic security that disproportionately affect the women and marginalized groups. Fourth, representation and participation. The feminists advocate for greater representation and participation of women in political decision-making processes within the state. This includes efforts to increase the number of women in elected offices, appointive positions, and leadership role within the government institutions. Fifth, intersectionality. Feminist perspectives emphasize the intersectional nature of the state power, recognizing that women experience the state differently based on factors such as race, class, sexuality, and even ability. This intersectional approach helps to uncover how multiple forms of oppression interact within the state structure. Sixth, state policies and impact on women. Feminists analyze how state policies impact women's lives, addressing issues such as reproductive rights, access to healthcare, education, labor rights, and even social welfare. They criticize policies that perpetuate gender inequality and advocate for policies that promote gender equity and social justice. The last is the global and transnational perspectives. The feminist analysis extend beyond the nation state to examine how global and transnational forces shape gender relations and women's rights. This includes critique of international institutions, global economic policies, and development agendas that may reinforce gender inequalities. Thus, the feminist views on the state challenge traditional assumptions about politics and power by highlighting how gender shapes state institutions, policies, and state-to-state practices. By interrogating these dynamics, feminists seek to transform state structures to be more inclusive, equitable, and responsive to the needs and rights of all the individuals regardless of their gender. We will continue our discussion on the feminist contributions to international relations in the next lecture. Thank you for your attention. Thank you and goodbye.